Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1985 film Santa Claus the Movie. Now, this is one of those films that has become a bit of a cult classic over the years, and I actually had never watched it all the way through until recently. I was aware of it because of its cast. I think I'd seen some clips featuring John Lithgow's BZ, but I had never actually sat down and watched the movie. And this movie is something else. Like, this is the kind of film that I genuinely enjoy watching because it's a fascinating failure. Like, it's a film that it's not an entirely bad movie, but it's definitely a failure in the end. Like, it's that kind of film where you're like, what were they thinking? And why did they make it this way? And it just makes you think long and hard about why somebody decided that this was worthy of spending $30 million on and why they thought this was going to be a hit. And despite all of that, despite everything that is just fundamentally flawed about this movie and this premise, it does have some genuine moments of spectacle. But it's also a film that has many moments of uh failure. So it's a film that's like, "Oh, this is kind of cool. This is kind of innovative. This is kind of interesting. This is well executed. This is well done. This is pretty awful. This is pretty lame. This is very corny." And it's just that kind of movie where you're like, there is potentially a good movie here despite the overall ridiculousness of the premise, but it just can't quite break out of the ice and fluff. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on Santa Claus the movie, I would like to give a special shout out to Brian for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Santa Claus the movie is directed by Jeannot Szwarc. And prior to this, he did Supergirl, which was also produced by the Salkinds. And what's wild is that he was not the first director that was chosen or was initially interested in this project. The first director was none other than horror legend himself, John Carpenter. Yes, the same man who gave us Halloween and The Fog and other genre classics like They Live and Big Trouble in Little China. Like, he legitimately was interested in doing the Santa Claus movie. But ultimately, he was let go because he had specific demands that the Salkinds didn't want to meet. So he wanted more creative control. He wanted final cut. They were not allowing to give that to him. He also wanted to do the soundtrack. They didn't want to allow him to do it. And I think he also planned on casting Brian Dennehy as Santa Claus, which I think that could have worked. Brian Dennehy's a good actor, and I think he has a certain warm, kind heart to him if you provide him with the right script. So that would have been a vastly different movie than the one that we got. I still think it would have been a flop, but it would have made an already fascinating flop into something that is even more intriguing. But it wasn't meant to be, and Carpenter ultimately was not involved with this movie. And instead, the director opportunity, the opportunity of directing this was given to Jeannot Szwarc, probably because of his prior involvement with the Salkinds with Supergirl. But I'm kind of surprised that he got the job because Supergirl was such a bomb And the Salkinds at this point, they were in dire need of another hit. And this wasn't it. This wound up being the last film that they produced. But Szwarc's direction isn't bad. His direction here is fine. I think it's on par with what he did with Supergirl, like, and with a majority of his other films. Honestly, I think he's a little bit of an underrated director because he never really did like an absolutely terrible, awful job in anything that I've seen him do, including this movie. So he did films that didn't do well financially, but it's never really an instance of, well, his direction was a major part of that film's failure. No. Like for a Santa Claus movie, Schwark did provide some genuine spectacle, some really nice looking shots, especially of the North Pole in the beginning, and did a good job working with the visual effects and working with Derek Meddings, who did the visual effects work, and created a film that had a certain look to it, had a certain sense of style and flair. It definitely had a Christmas magic. There was some holiday cheer that was present throughout the direction. Some good usage of wide shots and tight shots and pans and zooms and different kinds of angles. Like, it's not the kind of directing that is going to blow you away or blow your mind, but it's very competent, it's very skilled, it's very uh solid, uh especially for a movie like this, which is just a big budget family adventure about the origins of Santa Claus, and then Santa Claus going up against this unscrupulous evil toy maker who wants to replace Santa Claus, and ruin Christmas with his own vision of Christmas too. So like, it's not a film that I feel the director is just going through the motions. He's just doing it for a paycheck. Like, I definitely do feel that Jeannot is bringing some life to it. He's bringing some passion to it. Maybe it wasn't necessarily the biggest gift that he could have asked for when it comes to his career, but he still gave it his all, just like he tended to do for a majority of his films during this particular time period of the 70s and 80s when he got most of his high profile directing jobs. So, would it have been interesting to have seen what John Carpenter would have done? Absolutely. But I think Janet was still a very fair and strong choice. And I do think that his direction is definitely one of the better things about this film overall. The screenplay by David Newman, on the other hand, this is a script that is really an example of something that suffers greatly because it can't find a consistent tone. It takes things like really bizarrely seriously with Santa Claus and his origin story in like the first half of the movie, and then it goes straight into cartoon territory with BZ. And I really think that either it needed to make it into like this epic Christmas movie about the origins of Santa Claus and what happens when he has his first major trip across the world, or be an over the top cartoon about Santa Claus versus this evil toy maker and BZ. You can't really do both. And so what happens is the script just feels like it's split in two. It doesn't feel cohesive at all. It's like, okay, it's one movie and then it's another movie, and because of that, neither movie that's in this script is as good as it could be. There are some attempts at social commentary about consumerism and about assembly lines and corporations cutting corners in order to meet quotas, and how that is something that Patch ultimately brings to Santa's workshop, but it's very surface level and it's not anything that's really that deep. And I understand it's a kids movie, but I think there were some really interesting ideas here that they could have really uh, uh, dug deeper into or done more with, and they don't. And all of this other stuff involving like the two kids who are helping Santa, one of which is the niece or step niece of BZ. The other one is some random homeless kid. Those also felt very tacked on, like, oh, it's a kids movie, so we have to have kids in this. And I know the character of BZ gets a lot of flack for being out of place. I think the character is great. I think the character is honestly one of the best things about this movie. Yes, he's cartoonish, but the character is so cartoonishly over the top and villainous that it becomes really entertaining. And it's a movie about Santa Claus. Like, why was it taking itself so seriously to begin with? So, this is more of the type of tone and the type of character that this film should have been focusing on to begin with. Honestly, I would have liked to have seen more of BZ. I'm honestly the type who wishes that the entire film was like the second act, not the first act. I know a lot of people disagree. They think the first act is superior. And I can see why. There definitely are some good moments in the first half, despite how tonally inconsistent it is. Oh, the original Mr. and Mrs. Claus were actually regular people who almost died in the middle of the winter in like Scandinavia or something, near the North Pole. And then they wound up getting rescued by these elves. And then the elves took them in, and then they basically forced them to be Mr. and Mrs. Claus because it was a prophecy and they fulfilled the prophecy. And like the way that that is handled is hilarious, but in a completely unintentional way because it's so deathly serious that it becomes funny, but also really eerie and creepy at the same time. It's like you laugh because you're so uncomfortable with the elf being like, "Yeah, you're gonna live with us now." Oh, okay, and you're going to deliver toys to all the children of the world. All right. But what about what how am I going to do that? Like I'm only human. Like I'm eventually going to pass on. Like no, you will live forever along with your wife. Okay. And then you have like this elder elf that shows up and he's talking about this prophecy and how this guy this man was the chosen one and you will be called Santa Claus. And the guy asks like, well, how am I going to deliver all these presents in one night? And then the elder elf is all like, for you it will be eternal night. And I'm like, eternal night, that sounds horrible. So like there's just a lot of stuff about this first half tonally that is just so wildly off the map that it becomes funny, but not in a way that I think anyone involved with this script intended it to. Because the attempts to try to be funny in this first half, and honestly throughout the film, other than stuff involving BZ, is really unfunny. It's not funny in the slightest. It's roll your eyes out the back of your head type material. Really bad, lazy attempts at elf puns where Patch, Dudley Moore's character, will just constantly be saying really bad elf puns like the writer is just ripping off the Smurfs. And then there's other stuff too involving the kids that is not funny, and stuff that Santa does, and like there's a whole bit where Santa is upset that people are saying that he's fat, so then he goes on a diet, and there's all kinds of stuff in this that is just not very well thought out and not very well done. And one of them is definitely most of the humorous moments in this. And there's also like random out of place, really depressing moments too that don't really seem to fit for a film about Santa Claus. I mean, just the whole idea of a homeless kid being a prevalent and prominent part of this story, having the whole stuff with the reindeer crying when Patch leaves to ultimately work with BZ, the whole scene where the kids are getting beat up and bullied because they believe in Santa Claus because Santa delivered them cheap toys that broke, or like the whole stuff with the whole candy canes and the candy itself that makes people fly, but then like the candy canes that BZ forces Patch to make that he's gonna market as Christmas too. They make people fly way too high, and at the same time, if they get too hot, they explode. This leads to like the ending where BZ literally flies so high that he winds up in outer space. So there's just all kinds of stuff in this, all kinds of ideas, all kinds of concepts that are just completely out of out of left field, out there, don't necessarily work that well, and it just makes for a very poor script. Like there's even like this repeated thing where Santa Claus is trying to do this move with the reindeers, and he fails the first time, but of course he's able to effectively do the maneuver at the end of the movie. But it just seems like it's kind of pointless though, and it's just Santa showing off, or just some excuse to have some extra effect or something involving Santa Claus in the film's climax. And you have and the whole Christmas 2 thing, even the way that that's handled is disappointing. Because you're thinking that, okay, there's going to be something more to this, more than just an advertisement with Patch advertising this free candy. And you're thinking that, okay, that's going to lead to this genuine battle between Santa Claus and BZ. But Santa and BZ never share a scene together. There's never a scene where David Huddleston's Santa Claus goes up against John Lithgow's BZ. And you're thinking that that's what they're building up to, and there's never any scene between the two where they wind up facing off. The closest you get is when Patch has scenes with BZ, and BZ is talking about being a naughty boy, and that's why he never got anything from Santa. And you're like, okay, you're thinking that's going to lead to something later on, maybe even a change of heart for BZ, maybe something, but no, that never really happens. And despite all of that, the BZ scenes are still really entertaining. They really are. The movie lights up as soon as John Lithgow's character starts appearing in the movie after an hour in, because the character is just so cartoonishly evil that you can't help but laugh. I mean, the guy is at his trial for his dangerous toys, and he's smirking and he's smoking his cigar, and he's he's not even necessarily thinking it's that big of a deal that his teddy bears have glass and nails in them. Like BZ is totally the type of person who would love to have SNL's Erwin Mainway as a colleague of his. Uh, but the both of them should team up and terrorize Christmas with a bag of glass and teddy bears with glass and nails in them. Like It's such a hilarious character to me, and it's definitely on the nose when it comes to the way that it's satirizing consumerism and, business types who are just doing anything for money, including taking advantage of children, but it's something that stands out because of the fact that it's not taking itself seriously. Unlike a lot of other aspects of the script, this should have been an over the top romp the entire time. It's a Santa Claus movie. This isn't Citizen Kane. This isn't a serious affair. It's Santa Claus the movie. And sadly, we don't get a lot of that tone. We don't get a lot of that silliness throughout the majority of the movie. You have some other fun ideas too, like Patch getting his own rocket sled that he uses to deliver his free candy to people on Christmas, and that's also something that's utilized in the finale when Santa's trying to save Patch and the homeless kid before the candy canes explode. So there are some things that I feel are utilized decently enough. That is one of those things, and so is the initial origin of Santa Claus. But then there's other stuff that isn't utilized as well. For instance, the reason why Santa Claus he ultimately agrees to have Patch do something different with the toys. And then when that goes wrong, his answer is to just go back to being old school and traditional and doesn't really innovate. And I don't really like that. I think that was not really the best message to get across, that innovation is bad. Innovation without any guardrails is bad, but innovation with more control is a good thing. And I felt like maybe there was be something where Santa would give Patch a second chance by the end of the movie, but that never really happened. I also feel that there should have been more scenes of kids and parents being upset and disappointed with Santa's presence. The presence breaking down, a more extended sequence of that. So then people really turn on Santa Claus. And that's what leads to him having to actually make an appearance in front of people. Because then maybe Patch becomes like the next Santa Claus in some ways. Or BZ takes on that role. And Santa has to come in and show people the magic of Christmas again. And show people why Santa Claus is such a iconic and memorable and beloved figure. It would have been really interesting to have seen Santa Claus fail, because that's what it seemed initially was happening. He was failing. He had failed for the first time. And it would have been nice to have seen more of that. How he reacts to that. How he deals with that rejection. How he deals with all of those issues that are now popping up. How he deals with angry letters. How he deals with all this other stuff. That's the opposite of what Santa Claus has been receiving and dealing with for all these years, and then how he takes that and is able to turn that into a positive by the end of the movie. But that never happens with this script. It's almost like the writer just didn't even bother to expand upon any of these ideas and concepts that he had in mind for his film, except for the bare minimum stuff. So, yeah, this script is definitely not that good, and I think it's absolutely a big reason why this movie doesn't have the same acclaim or status as other Christmas films, because of the fact that it's just not really that well written of a film. Now, the cast I don't think is anywhere near as much of a disappointment as the script. Like, there are a couple actors here who are kind of phoning it in or aren't the best, but for the most part, I think the main performers here, they did some good work. Like David Huddleston as Santa Claus, I thought he did a great job playing this character. He was more laid back. He wasn't as boastful or as brash as some of the other interpretations of Santa Claus, but it worked because he had a certain cheer about him, a certain charm. He definitely did have his own personality that he lent to it as well. And there was a sincerity about it. Like, he played it straight, but in a way that came across as sincere. Like, he genuinely was a nice guy who just wanted to do a lot of good for the children of the world. Like, you really did buy that when it comes to his performance. And when there were so many scenes, especially later on in the movie, where he's just not really given much to do, you felt bad. Because you're like, here you have an actor who is giving their all despite it being this kind of silly role, him playing Santa Claus, and he's not being rewarded enough for it. He's not given enough to do. Um, John Lithgow, kind of a similar thing because I love his performance as BZ. Some people hate it because he's just so over the top and he's chewing the scenery and he's hamming it up. But I really enjoy it because it's really entertaining. And I can't imagine anyone else playing that role other than John Lithgow. But there were other actors that were considered for it, like Harrison Ford, Burt Reynolds, Dustin Hoffman, and Johnny Carson. I can't see Harrison Ford playing an evil toy maker. Burt Reynolds, no. Like, what is he going to be like? He's going to have a cigar and then he's going to do his signature laugh and just have Dom DeLuise as a part of his staff. Like, I don't really see that working. Dustin Hoffman, maybe. Johnny Carson, what? So ultimately, the role went to John Lithgow, and he turned it all the way to 11, broke the knob way completely off in the process. I mean, the whole scene when he's reacting to Patch's plan to give out the candy for free, it's comic gold. Wh- 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 For free? like just the way that he says that, it just cracks me up every time. And just everything about just how unbelievably evil this guy is. It was just a really entertaining, fun performance. Yeah, he's a walking cartoon, but that's a big part of the appeal of that performance. I wanted more of it, not less. And that's what's interesting is like David Huddleston and John Lithgow to me are the best actors in this, and they don't get as much to do throughout the entirety of the film. Like, Huddleston has more to do than John Lithgow because he's there from the beginning. John Lithgow, though, he doesn't appear until like over an hour in. Dudley Moore's Patch, it's a okay performance by him. He seems like he is giving at least an above average performance when he's doing something that's a little bit more serious. And he's able to show his acting talents. But when it comes to the comedic stuff, funny enough, which is what he's known for, which is his trademark, he's really phoning it in. But I think a lot of that has to do with what he's given to work with. Like a bunch of elf puns. Like, come on. Not even Dudley Moore is going to make that funny. And so I think there's a lot of stuff where Dudley, he's just trying to make the best of it throughout the entire movie. He's basically just soldiering on because of the check, but there are some moments where I think he was a little bit more inspired on the set because he believed in what his character was saying or what his character was doing for that scene. But then when there were other stuff that he didn't believe in as much, you could really tell. Um, you also have Burgess Meredith, who plays the ancient elf. He's in it for like one scene. Burgess clearly was just showing up for his check, just very phoned in performance, but it was fine for what it is. Like it was very average. He didn't give anything other than a mid performance, but it wasn't like distractingly bad though. Um, but it wasn't, and it definitely wasn't anything that you would put on his best of playlist when it comes to like his performances throughout his career. Now, the Salkinds initially didn't even want Meredith for that role. They wanted James Cagney, but Cagney was too old and too frail and too sick to do it. Then they tried to get Fred Astaire, but Fred Astaire I bet he probably just slammed the door in their face or hung up the phone when they asked him over the phone to play the ancient elf. And they ultimately went with Burgess Meredith instead. Now you also have these kid actors who were playing Cornelia and Joe. So you have Christian L. Fitzpatrick who plays Joe and Carrie Kei Heim who play Cornelia. And the two of them were not really that great. They didn't pick the best child actors for this. So a lot of the scenes involving those two were kind of hard to watch because the acting was so bad. Um and they just didn't really have much of a personality to them. There wasn't much charisma. And if you're not the best actor when you're cast for, a role as a kid, you need to have at least more of a on-screen charisma, but they didn't have that. So that was not really that great. Definitely was something that hurt the film a little bit, to be honest, when it was focusing on those two. The other actors and actresses, like, I mean, different people playing different elves, or Mrs. Claus, played by Judy Cornwell as Anya. I thought she did a good job. I felt she had some good chemistry with David Huddleston for sure. Um, Jeffrey Kramer is Towser. Anthony O'Donnell is Puffy. Um, and not the Puffy you're thinking of. No, Puff Daddy's not in this. That would be a completely different movie if he was. But yeah, I mean the cast. I don't think it's as disappointing as the script, but there are some performances that aren't the best. But for the most part, when it comes to your two main performers, as well as like Dudley Moore, it's not that bad. It's decent enough. The cinematography by Arthur Ibbotson, I didn't think it was incredible, but I felt that it also wasn't inept. Like it was fine for the movie that this is. There definitely were some moments, some shots where I felt the visuals looked pretty good. When it comes to like the North Pole miniature set and how that was shot, or some of the scenes at BZ's factory, or some of the flying sequences with Santa and his sleigh. The editing by Peter Hollywood, I felt was adequate. It was decent enough. It had some moments where it was a bit off, a bit wonky when it comes to some of the montages, some of the other scenes, but it wasn't a poor film when it comes to the editing. The score by Henry Mancini, I thought was honestly, for the most part, excellent. I thought he did a really good job with the score. Like, it definitely had an epic feel to it, but it also had, that Christmas feel. Like it wasn't something that just felt like it was a completely, manufactured score without any heart. There definitely felt like there was a lot of heart and soul with this score, and I think that definitely went a long way for this movie. And it lent some genuine epic notes to certain scenes that just made them really stand out. Like when Claus and his wife first see the North Pole and see the elves, or the scene when the elves present Santa with the room full of all the toys and showing the workshop for the first time. Like there were some genuine moments of awe in this movie, and in large part, it was due to what Henry Mancini brought to the film with his score, as well as the visuals. But with the score combined with the visuals, it just made honestly for something that was genuinely special. The songs that were used for the soundtrack, they were fine, like Christmas All Over the World that Sheena Easton performed. I know originally that was something that the Salkinds wanted Freddie Mercury to do, but Freddie actually did a demo, but then he wasn't feeling it, and then he ultimately decided to do Highlander instead. So then Sheena Easton did the vocals for it, and she did a good job. That's a nice a Christmas song. Has a good heart to it. Definitely something that I could see on a lot of other people's Christmas playlists. I mean, if I was making one, I'd probably put it on there somewhere. And the budget, which is rumored to be like all the way up to $50 million, it's definitely on the screen. Like the flying scenes with Santa and his sleigh that was done by Derek Meddings is honestly pretty great for the time period. The miniature work that Derek Meddings also worked on, I felt was really good. Maybe he did the miniature work and somebody else did the visual effects, but whoever it was, they did some nice work. Derek Meddings is a veteran of miniature effects and working on a lot of other visual effects related stuff, and his experience definitely did show here, and it paid off. And yeah, I don't think it's a film that has sequences involving the effects that look really bad. Like I don't even think the blue screen is something that looks that poor. Especially if you have the right context. Is it gonna look as good as green screen effects do nowadays? No, but it was 1985. So you have to put things into their proper context when it comes to looking at the effects in this. So I don't think this looked cheap. There was even some really good animatronic work for the reindeer because there were some scenes that they couldn't shoot with the real deer, and so they used animatronic reindeer. And I felt the animatronic reindeer looked, for the most part, pretty lifelike. So that was a job well done by the people who worked on that aspect of the film's effects. If you're in the mood for a different flavor of Christmas movie, this is definitely something that I feel is worth a watch. This film is ultimately what it would have been like if Canon Films made a Christmas movie. If that sounds like something that's interesting to you or could be fun, then definitely give this one a watch. If not, yeah, it's probably not going to be something that you're going to enjoy that much. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Santa Claus the movie, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.